some people start from a very moral foundation, or a personal moral foundation, and can stick with that. And other people say, oh, we've got to get our token onto exchanges as quickly as possible, and start pumping up our treasury and things like that, right? And that's I try not to be judgmental about people who are thinking like that. I can understand the pressures that they're under, because there's always this feeling that, oh, we've got to come up with the next big thing, right? I mean, that's been the issue that I find most difficult in this space, is that people are saying, oh, what's the next big thing? What's the next big thing? Who's going to win the hackathon? What's the focus of this next 4-year cycle, right? Is it DeFi? Is it NFTs? What's it going to be next, right? And rather than saying, no, actually, we have a project. That project was laid out thousands of years ago, many thousands of years ago. We have an ecological outcome that we need to achieve in the future, right? We have structures going back many thousands of years. We have some that suit the modern era better. Those are really the projects that we should just focus on and stay focused on. And we, to battle the tendency towards hierarchy and towards psycho people rising to the top of the heap in power, right? And then holding that power for themselves. And then you have the next layer, the bankers and the hidden wealthy who really pull the strings of the monetary system, right? The billionaires and so on. And we need to be able to develop systems that can go up against that, because that project remains the same.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Dream Wonders series on the Mindplex Podcast. Today, we have as guest, I would say, an old pal who's been orbiting my world for a long time, often at the edges of the same questions that keep me awake at night. Like, what would it mean to redesign money itself so that our economies become symbiotic with life rather than extractive against it? Hi, Stephen. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Mihaela. Thank you very much. It's great to see you again.
You are a pioneer of community and digital currencies with more than 35 years of experience, and you are also Canadian, which I also am Canadian, and pioneer of digital currencies also. So your passion is in helping communities on every continent design their own financial tools to strengthen local economies, support small businesses, and increase resilience. And you are one of the most honest souls which I ever encountered, really committed to this cause from the beginning. Because I first stumbled upon you, I even don't remember how many years ago, when you were working with the Coin Foundation. I still have you in my WhatsApp as Stephen Coin Foundation, just so you know. That's how I have you. And I think, I don't know if you are CTO, but you are building something like rails for funding digital ways to fund non-profits, disaster response, and so on. What brought you there? Tell us a bit, like maybe a little bit of autobiographic. Also, tell us how to pronounce your family name. Tell us a bit about yourself and your past that brought you to this Coin Foundation and those kinds of interests.
Sure. My name is Stephen DeMeulenaere. I'm from Canada, Western Canada, British Columbia in particular. I would start by saying that I was a university student at the University of Victoria on Vancouver Island in the late 1980s and through to the mid 1990s. I was doing an undergraduate degree in political science and ecological studies, or at that time it was called environmental studies, because I have a very strong interest in environmental and ecological issues as well. And I had been studying Soviet government, actually, as my concentration, because I started university before the Soviet Union collapsed. And as part of that, I was studying older Russian thinkers like Peter Kropotkin. And I happened to be, it was a Sunday afternoon, and I was taking a walk with some friends of mine. And I was reading both Mutual Aid by Peter Kropotkin, which influenced my life a lot, and Post Scarcity Anarchism by Murray Bookchin. So looking at how older systems, anarchist systems, systems that um, people lived with in times of crisis could be projected into the future, and what would those systems of economy and politics and society look like. And I happened to stumble across a table for the local exchange trading system, or LETS as many people know it. And so there's all these vegetable sellers, people selling things that they made at home, side by side. And then there was a table for LETS. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. What is this? And so LETS is a mutual credit system, a local monetary system that allows people to issue their own credit into a community economy and circulate that between each other. And I thought, well, that's exactly what I'm reading about in these books. And so I joined the system and became involved as an active trader. And they said, well, you're a smart young fellow. I was 20, my early 20s at the time. And they said, could you help us? We have a serious problem. And the problem was is that the administration was issuing money, or they were paying from their account, so to people who were running the system. And that amount ended up being quite a lot more than the amount of trading that was actually going on in the system. And so the system was capsizing, actually. It was tipping towards the people who were involved in the administration, who were being paid by the system, creating money out of thin air. And it was basically doing exactly the same thing as the regular monetary system does. And so I said, well, I devised a plan and said, okay, well, this is what we've got to do. And it's going to be a little bit painful, but you have to reduce your balances that you have, either by spending more money or by removing it some other way that's, of course, ethical, for all of you. And demurrage seems, or negative interest seems like one of the fairest ways to do that. So I would say, start spending your money now, buy as much as you can in the system, and then we're going to start taxing it away until the system rebalances itself. And the creator of the local exchange trading system, Michael Linton, started the first one just up the island, up Vancouver Island in the Comox Valley. And of course, he was furious. And so he said, no, this is not how it should happen. You should kill it and restart a new system and make everyone start from zero all over again. And so I started to discuss this in the early discussion groups. I mean, this is really when the bulletin board systems of the interweb started to turn into the internet, and we could communicate more widely between each other. And then I met this very nice professor, Bernard Lietaer, around 1994, 93, 94. Yes, my hero as well. And he said, no, you don't need to. Demurrage is a way that you can, something that you can do to rebalance a system, right? It's not the ideal way of going about it. I mean, ideally, you would want to start from a system where everyone is equal, rather than using it to punish people who have been involved in building up the system over these last several years, because Let's was quite young then. But that discussion, and Thomas Greco was in there as well too.
Yes,
Standing.
I have his book here,
Oh
Thomas
yes,
Greco.
excellent.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
excellent.
He is my
The
hero too, and Bernard Lietaer had a book chapter here in From Bitcoin to Burning Man and Beyond, which is I
yeah,
contributed also a book chapter. We have many common heroes. Go
yeah,
on.
yeah, absolutely. So I became involved in. So we got through that. We got the system rebalanced. Everything was working good again. But in my own personal life, it was quite difficult living in Victoria. Victoria is a very expensive city. It was difficult to find work. Of course, there are so many smart students graduating university every year that it was very difficult for me to find work. And so I soon started looking to leave Canada. I had a large student loan to pay, of course, um, and so I needed to absolutely. I I come from the working class. My father was a truck driver, and my mother was a housewife. And so I grew up working on heavy machinery and vehicles, and working in the far north of Canada and such. And so it was a difficult transition. I mean, my parents couldn't afford to pay for university or anything like that. I paid for all of that myself. As part of the, it's the price you pay. If you're someone who's not like the others, and I wasn't really like the others. I couldn't become. I mean, I love the trades, and I have a lot of skills in that area, but it's not something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. After, say, leaving high school, I wanted to go to university and such. But so by 1995, I was already starting to focus more on other countries. So I started a research project in Mexico with the Tianguis Tlaloc, which was a local currency that was operating then, and then to Argentina with the Red Global de Trueque, also in the late 90s. And I thought, okay, well, I think I'll focus on Central and South America instead. And so I went down there and did some work for over periods of time with those two systems. But then I was called to Japan. I was offered a job teaching in a high school in Japan. And so all of a sudden, I went from Argentina back to Canada and then to Japan within a few months. And then the Asian monetary crisis hit in 1998 when I was in Japan, and so I wasn't. I mean, I was teaching full time, and then I was called down to the Sumitomo Bank has a think tank called the Japan Research Institute, and they contacted me through these networks and said, we need someone who understands community currencies, and we need them fast. And so they brought me down to Tokyo, and it was a very difficult process to get permission from my office to do that. They thought, well, why does a major bank want someone, some young fellow who's not even 30 yet, to come down and talk with them about that? But so I went down and did some consulting for the Japan Research Institute, and then finished my contract as a teacher. And then I was asked to go to Thailand to help to do more, to assist with the aftermath, well, it was really ongoing for years in Thailand, and then in Indonesia, where I am now. And so, yeah, and throughout this time, I just kept on building my skills and staying well connected with
So,
people in the movement
but
like Thomas and
you
Bernard.
didn't tell us about the Coin Foundation. So how did you end up there? Or that was the one with Lietaer and all that? Where
Uh,
was that? How it
no,
was your connection?
my work in Indonesia and Thailand and Hong Kong and Japan was supported through the Strohom Foundation, now known as Social Trade, in Utrecht. And my colleagues there, or around that time, were Edgar Campers and Rob Van Hilton, who had left the Strohom Foundation and formed Coin as part of a major project they were doing, an EU-funded project called Barataria. And so I had already connected with Edgar and Rob um, 10 years before that. And so it was just knowing them. I've been friends with them since '95, and we're very good friends to this day. And so I became involved with the Coin Foundation together with
So,
them.
from what you told us so far, it's clear that, I mean, you are heart and soul with the people, right? Because, I mean, your life, since you were a child, was not really of the elites, I would say. So you definitely, I think that's also part of your commitment to uh, to what you are doing, right? to, when I met you, I immediately felt, finally, I met someone who understands that technology and capital are only meaningful when they serve real people in real places, not just, printing money and from the ivory tower and then distribute it. It doesn't matter what happens. So, as far as I know, you were also you had a brush with Ripple, because I also worked with the Jet McCaleb in the beginning, and they were kind of Ripple labs. I think they were before Bitcoin.
That's
Is
correct.
it is this true? Did you also work with Jed? Did you interact with Ripple
Yes, I
somehow?
did, but not with Jed.
Okay.
So the local exchange trading system was actually also a very early digital currency. Now, most people in the Web3 space think that digital currency started with Wei Dai or Adam Back and so on, but they don't actually go back to the earlier forms of digital currencies and Let's version one, release three, which came out in the well, I mean there was Let's software even back into the '90s that was running on DOS and MLETs as well. Yeah, it was very early, and so I had been exploring digital currencies and had been working with a number of groups, in the very early days of PHP, MySQL, um, to build better interfaces for mutual credit systems. And then around 2004, 3, 4, something like that, I received an email from Ryan Fugger, who's from Kelowna, British Columbia, and he said, "I'm developing a new model for designing mutual credit systems using a decentralized transaction model I call the Web of Trust." And I'm actually from that part of British Columbia, the Okanagan Valley, and I said, "Great! I'll as soon as I'm back from when I come back on my visits from to Canada from Southeast Asia, I'll come and visit you." And we hit it off. We're still friends. We met up just a few months ago in Kelowna, and and so he started off. He started Ripple. He started the domain name Ripple.com and everything like that, and he sold that to Jed McCaleb and to
So
form
you
Ripple
were
Labs.
way ahead of of me with that. Okay.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
Wow.
But I
Wow.
wasn't. I
Wow.
wasn't coding. I'm not a coder. I'm just someone who can look at diagrams and say, yes, that's right, and no,
That's
this isn't
right.
right.
And
This
and
isn't
and
gonna.
you
Yeah.
are a community maverick, and you understand people and their needs, and then adapt the technology to their needs. That's your strong point. I
Hmm.
know, because I witnessed also, how you are even speaking in conferences. We will get there. So that's how I recognized you, because I mean, so with this web of trust and being there before Bitcoin and all that, and doing this kind of work presciently, I would say. Um, you were part of what I like to call the honest wing of the cypherpunk movement before it became what I call Ponzinomics, right? So
Right.
so
Well, and
so
there are many, of course, like Douglas Rushkoff, the
yes.
the real veritable cypherpunks. Um,
Yes, I have his book here, Throwing Stones at the Google bus, which actually
mhm,
he launched when we met at Bretton Woods. But
mhm.
let's stay here, because what I'd like to ask you is, like, people like you, like Douglas Rushkoff, are people who still believe that decentralization is not a marketing slogan, but a moral commitment to redesign power and redistribute it. And like with his team Human, yes, we are part of that.
Yes.
And so we met him, yeah, and you were there at Bretton Woods 75. I was there, and uh, we were trying to build, and we discussed there, yes, how to design regenerative multi-layered currencies rather than a single hegemonic unit. And you argue that a single centralized currency is like a biological monoculture, if I may, efficient but brittle. So, how
Right.
would, in your opinion, a healthy monetary ecosystem look like in practice?
It
Can
would look
you?
like monetary diversity. So Bernard Lietaer was a really strong proponent of that in the early debates about let systems. Some people felt that let systems was the highest form of alternative currency or community currency system, and that no other kind would be needed in the future going forward. And Bernard was very much opposed to that. He was not wasn't very interested in digital currencies. You know, he's not from that era, and but he allowed the space for that to develop and said, well, maybe digital currencies can help us to achieve this in ways that mutual credit systems can't, because mutual credit systems, while they're great, they do have problems with scaling. And yeah, so there's issues. I mean, it's not a problem at all, but mutual credit systems are high trust systems. And so moving from an established high trust system to a lower trust system, like a printed money or Bitcoin or Ethereum, which can circulate between people who don't know each other, but we still trust it, is very different than issuing a currency that you exchange with people that you meet face to face and exchange with regularly. So these thinkers allowed for a great diversity, even ones that they couldn't foresee.
The Bernard chapter in our book From Bitcoin to Burning Men and Beyond, just so you know that he had a brush towards the end of his life with the digital currency. It's named Why Complementary Currencies, and this is aligned with what you say about the ecosystem of currencies. Why complementary currencies are necessary to financial stability, the scientific evidence. So he brings their, scientific evidence for that. So it's totally correct what you're saying
Uh,
here.
Absolutely. Bernard, Bernard has a few brilliant diagrams. The yin yang image of money, between yang forms of money, which are hierarchical and competitive and extractive and so on, and yin forms of money, which are collaborative, cooperative,
Yes, we have it here
more
in the book
egalitarian.
chapter. I don't know if you can
Yes,
see it.
that's right,
Yes,
and we have it in our book as well too. Pathways to
amazing.
regeneration. I don't know
That's
if it will
right. I
show up
have
on the
that as
screen.
well. I will
I
I
don't
will
think it
bring
will.
it up. Yes. Yes, I
Yeah,
wanted
absolutely.
to,
So Bernard's,
yeah, go
sorry
ahead.
if I
Go
can
ahead.
just say, Bernard has another really great diagram, and around that time he was giving these really great lectures on efficiency and resilience, and understanding monetary diversity through that lens. And so you do need currencies which are efficient, and, transact efficiently, store wealth efficiently, and so on, and those that are resilient, that ensure that we are still taking care of everybody, and that funds or wealth is being recirculated throughout the economy as a whole. Because if it's not, then it's like like what we see with the mainstream financial system now, where the heart, the banking sector, the investment sector is gigantic. It's not a heart in the love sense. It's just a pump, and that's huge. And while the body, the limbs and the fingers are starving, the low income people are being left out, and basically cut off. And so, if we under, I mean, some people don't like that metaphor, but I think it's very effective in understanding how um, economic
Yeah, I
systems
think you're
should work
correct.
both
Like
for
with the
people and for the planet.
meltdown and stuff, and yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
I agree. I agree. So, we met last time in Bangkok when I was at the Super Intelligence Summit, and concomitantly, you were a keynote speaker at the Reinventing the Commons gathering,
Funding the commons, yes. Hmm.
funding the commons. Anyway, it's also reinventing all the time, right? So,
Hmm.
and there in our conversation, you were just, you confided that you were putting the finishing touches to your book. Yes, Pathways to Regeneration, Hope and Resilience Through Anticipatory Design, which you co authored with your longtime friend, Scott Morris. And
Yes.
now the book is out, right? Which I'm so excited about that. And of course, I want to talk to you about it, and we will put the link in the description so people can get the book. But I
Hmm.
wanted to say that you were telling me something at the time that you are not that much interested anymore in community currencies, but in other forms of currencies, or maybe I misunderstood. Tell me, what does it bring new? What is your paradigm shift with this book?
I
What?
don't. Well,
Okay, go
the
ahead.
paradigm shift. Okay, so yeah, I can go at it. I can approach this from two different angles. The paradigm shift is that if we understand the spectrum of trust and how currencies can provide efficiency and resilience along that spectrum of trust, from high trust to low trust, or from low trust to high trust, is actually the way that we hope that this will proceed. We have a few obstacles in our way, and that's really the regulatory environment and how governments are viewing this, and it's always been that way. Um, yeah, and there's an unfinished project in history, and that's the cooperative movement. The cooperative movement grew out of the monetary and economic crises of the 1800s, right, and the realization that the money that was created by the Bank of England and such was going to only flow through wealthy people and ensure that the hierarchy was maintained. And then you have these the initiators of the cooperative movement exploring community currencies, very early forms of community currencies, all in many different countries around the world. And they, yeah, that the excuse me for a moment. And they were trying really hard to explain or keep the monetary system within the cooperative movement structure. But there came a point at which the regulatory authorities, the central banks, and the government said, "Oh no, no, we have to stop this. We can't allow we can allow them to form their own enterprises and they participate in the capitalist economy and they use our money, but we won't allow them to create their own forms of money and use that as an exchange between each other." Right, and so that's really an unfinished project in history that we've been trying to bring back through community currencies and then reconnect it to the credit union or cooperative movement, because they really aren't looking at that. They're terrified of being shut, of their project being shut down entirely by the state, because of course the governments would prefer that we all just work for bosses rather than own our own means of production and forms of
Of
labor.
course.
Right?
So, you've been designing and studying this kind of community money forever. Let's put it this way. Yes, of course, is like real pioneer in that. And you worked with the best and with the really true pioneers. And looking back from where you are now with the new book, Pathways to Regeneration, what was an aha moment for you? Like in which okay, so I've been designing these currencies, but okay, now I have a new perspective.
Um,
Was there any?
yes, certainly. The aha moment came when I realized that I wasn't alone, or I wasn't alone in a small group of people who thought the same way. All of a sudden, you know, uh, Vitalik Buterin and Kevin Owocki and a number of Glenn Whale and a number of other really awesome people in mostly in the Ethereum space started talking about these kinds of ideas as well. And then we saw then funding the commons was started, and those events or side events at major Ethereum conferences gave me the confidence and interest to become more involved in what was being built in that space and see that if I could contribute to it, because there is Ethereum excuse me, Ethereum, as awesome as it is still very much um, aimed towards people who don't have much of a philosophical or political understanding of these systems. and the history of them and how far back that history goes. As I was saying earlier, most of them think that digital currency started with the Ethereum crowd sale, pretty much, and or the creation of Bitcoin and Satoshi Nakamoto, and don't know about the people who came before that and what they were actually thinking about. People say cypherpunks, but they don't actually talk about what the cypherpunks were actually talking about when they were talking about cypherpunk things, and they were talking about transparency, radical transparency, and opening your books up to everyone. Which is why we have a transparent blockchain that block explorers you can explore and see those accounts. But that's what we had in local exchange trading systems. Anyone had access to the books. Anyone that you traded with in the system, you could see their name, their balance, their turnover, how much trading they were doing in the system, which could help you to understand how active they were in the system. So those ideas from early community currency and digital currencies helped to found the basis of how blockchain-based currencies were designed. So that aha moment got me back into the space. I'd been, of course, as an individual, I purchased Ethereum in the crowd sale. I acquired Bitcoin quite early, although as a I wasn't a wealthy person. I've been in Indonesia since 2000. So it wasn't. I didn't have any major jobs, and so high-paying positions or anything. So I'm certainly not as wealthy as others who were early in the space. I was more interested in the cause, absolutely, and I bought a little bit of Ethereum and a little bit of Bitcoin to participate in the economic system and support that. But the other aha moment came for me when I realized that Bitcoin was back in 2012, 13, 14 was primarily speculative. And of course, there were brilliant minds like Andreas Antonopoulos and others helping to point people towards the future. And we had some conversations. I'm like, you're pointing, your talk about the future of Bitcoin is amazing, but do talk about the past sometimes as well too. I've met Andreas once or twice and had some really great conversations with him. Just an amazing guy. But it's as digital currencies became more established, that's when I realized that, okay, we do have the foundation for a new monetary system here that cannot be shut down by governments, right?
Exactly. So
That's the
your
next
book,
big aha moment.
because now we are here at the Ethereum and Gitcoin, and of course the forgotten pioneers of which you are one, right? As you say, they should actually talk about this, and not only talk, but with some reverence, if I may. The book is also a bit nuanced, if I may, about blockchain. I mean, it has a huge potential for liberation, but as we all know, yes, it also has the risk of simply reproducing, extracting finance in new code. So you have written extensively on the alternative models, on indigenous economic models, digital currencies for financial inclusion, and why creating just another token is meaningless unless it has a real reason to exist in service of community and ecology, like, for example, Gitcoin. Yeah, I think that's a great project with Kevin, of course. Um, from what you have seen in the blockchain world, what would distinguish, if I may call it, regenerative Web3 project from one that's just another speculative machine?
I think you'll know it when you see it. Right?
Well, maybe not, and then you are fooled, and it's like someone is getting a lot of
Yes,
money while you are
and
bleeding.
that has happened. That has happened in the regenerative finance space as well too. I think.
Okay. Wow. Wow.
Um,
So.
yeah, yeah. There have been some hard lessons learned in the space already, and there certainly is concern that people who don't have the same level of ethics as other people are going to misuse the term commons or regenerative and such. Um, in order to recreate tokens that simply return value to them personally, right? So there's a level of, the high level of transparency and governance, and that being backed up by polycentric governance, especially when it comes to the treasury, right? Because that's but it's also an understanding in the leadership of, or the stewardship or initiation of these systems as well too. I think there have been a number of mistakes made, or hopefully lessons learned that won't be repeated about how those how these systems should be initiated and managed and understood, and how they should transition to new stewards and new leaders and new financial managers when problems are discovered. It often happens in the blockchain space, as it does in the NGO space or in the government space, that governance attracts certain kinds of people, and it attracts certain kinds of ideas. The most exciting ideas, the most innovative ideas, of course, in hackathons and such, or the most charismatic speakers, the people who are willing to get up on stage, and talk to 200, 500, 1,000, 10,000 people. It takes a really high level of personal or morals, right, or ethics to be able to keep your head and not allow these things to derail you and your project, right? And that's what I admire so much about Vitalik and other key people, is that you can see how much they struggle, right, with this issue, because they're constantly being pulled in a capital oriented direction. And I know CZ. I met him in 2018 because they sponsored the Blockchains for Sustainable Development at UN headquarters in Geneva that I organized. And CZ and Justin Sun and I had a number of conversations about this, right? CZ is a wonderful guy. Justin Sun, I just, they are actually, very different than what you see and what you hear from them often saying. Deep down, they're actually wonderful guys wanting to do wonderful things in a lot of ways, right? But the pull of billions of dollars flowing into their system, the transaction fees, aggregation, and so on, it makes it really, really tough, right? It's really hard to do an exit to community and say, okay, I'm going to decentralize the leadership of Binance or Tron to a group of 10 stewards, and those people will be voted on through the new DAO that we've created, or 100 stewards, and so on. So when these systems are created, they need to be started with a high level of ethics from the beginning, and the people in them have to recognize when they've done as much as they can and need to step back and let other people come in. We have lots of models of governance out there that allow for people to you know to be in positions of leadership by lottery voting, or shorter terms and things like that, right?
It's
But it's hard to
amazing
do.
that you are giving this. I'd like if you can coin all what you are mentioning here into a recipe. If you were to advise a new DAO or local currency today, that would learn from those lessons, from what's happening and how even these pure souls deep down get captured by the magnitude of the money and whatever they make. And then the charismatic ones, and it's the opposite. When I witnessed your style of keynote at funding the commons, when you actually gathered everyone around you and just were talking person to person. It was completely different, a different way. So if you were to advise a new DAO, so you mentioned this, I mean, rotation of leadership and so on. Do you have kind of some bullet points, or or not yet? And we can. It's
It's really
necessary.
situation specific, and the
Okay.
problem is I mean, for me personally, is that a lot of people in the space. I'm trying to be diplomatic here. I mean, they are usually looking at what attracts. It's in human nature, and so the good-looking people, the ones who speak very well and have and can frame or phrase their ideas in ways that are exciting for people to listen to, and the people who are older perhaps, or the more introverted types and so on are often left to the side, but they're the ones that actually need to be brought into these structures, and that's hard. It's really hard to do. So the DAO model that I'm most interested in the moment is Haifa, and so there's a, some really cool projects being developed in on the Haifa DAO framework right now. The technical or technological framework that can allow for these kinds of structures to be created. And that means polycentric governance, and it can allow for a wide variety of selection systems and so on. But I think, as you would agree, it still does come back down to the individual, or to the person within the group, or the culture that gets formed in the early stages of the initiation of a project or platform or idea, right? Um, I think people start. Some people start from a very moral foundation, or a personal moral foundation, and can stick with that. And other people say, "Oh, we've got to get our token, onto exchanges as quickly as possible, and start pumping up our treasury and things like that," right? And that's I, I mean, I try not to be judgmental about people who are thinking like that. I can understand the pressures that they're under, because there's always this feeling that, oh, we've got to come up with the next big thing, right? I mean, that's been the issue that I find most difficult in this space, is that people are saying, oh, what's the next big thing? What's the next big thing? Who's going to win the hackathon? What's the focus of this next 4-year cycle, right? It's not. Is it DeFi? Is it NFTs? What's it going to be next, right? And rather than saying, no, actually, we have a project. That project was laid out thousands of years ago, many thousands of years ago. Um, and we have an ecological outcome that we need to achieve in the future, right? We have structures, going back many thousands of years. We have some that suit the modern era better. Those are really the projects that we should just focus on and stay focused on, and we to battle the tendency towards hierarchy and towards psycho people rising to the top of the heap in power, right? And then holding that power for themselves. And then you have the next layer, the bankers and the hidden wealthy who really pull the strings of the monetary system, right? The billionaires and so on. And we need to be able to develop systems that can go up against that, because that project remains the same. We don't need to call it political terms, like communist or anarchist or something like that. This is about society and the future of society on a livable planet, and it's not a chessboard, right? Which has a frame around it. It's everything. It's Cosmo, right? Cosmo, in that sense that Michelle Bowens talks about. Right? And localism is then the key to how we achieve that Cosmo outcome.
Hmm. And so that's what you're talking about in the book also, this regenerative imperative, which is like a step change in system function, not just better ESG. so
Right.
yes, yes. So this we need to shift the mindset of the policymakers and of course the charismatic entrepreneurs who give lip service to the ESG and still think in terms of this green growth and other
Hmm.
buzzwords. But we need to be honest to the
Yeah.
yes to,
It's hard for people to think about um,
to the
making these
project,
kinds of
the
changes when
original
it's not really
project.
affecting
Yeah,
them personally. But
yeah.
as we wrote about in chapter 1 of the book, we do think that the climate crisis is what's going to be the one that brings people together on a more broad scale, right? The writing of Jem Bendel in his book Breaking Together, and others who have been studying the field of emerging field of collapsology and understanding that. Because, as we also talk about in the book, it's only through crisis that we develop innovative financial tools that help people to survive them. Right? And I'm reading a really wonderful book right now. I need to bring it up to remember the title of it. It's Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit. It's published by Penguin, and it's a really fantastic book about how societies recover in the wake of major disasters. And she looks at a number of major disasters, um, starting about from the late 1800s, early 1900s. And if we look at how communities responded to help each other and recover during those disasters, we see how power operates, and or the effort to impose order on a society that is recovering together from a major crisis. And of course, most recently we had COVID, and I was here in Indonesia um, during COVID, and it was amazing to see how the Balinese people and us, of course, as part of the society, helped each other and kept an eye on each other and made sure that people were fed and distributed food and distributed money and resources to each other equally. My neighbors would be my Balinese neighbors across the street would be coming to check on me. I would be coming to check on them, and we would just have our own sort of social economy going on. So when we're talking about developing blockchain tools or community currency tools, it's really from a lens of what will we need in the future, uh, you know, to be able to overcome the next crisis. Whether that's in the case here in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. If you've been following the news, the devastating floods in Philippines and Vietnam and Thailand and Indonesia that are worse than they've ever been as long as I've been living in Asia, which is nearly 30 years. That's one area, right, where people are losing their vehicles, their computers, their motorcycles, their bedding, their home, everything inside their house. When there's 6 feet or two or more meters of water rushing through their homes, right? So the and what effect does that have on? Well, GDP goes up, right? and that's awful, right? Uh, we need to develop new models for recording how disasters are affecting our environment and what's needed to recover from them. So, what one of the other aha moments that came to me then around the time of thinking about my talk at Funding the Commons in Bangkok last year um, was that national governments are going to have an increasingly difficult time raising the funds needed to mitigate these crises. They're going to have to print more and more and more money to try to mitigate these crises. Building better infrastructure and so on, but also then to recover from them. And I think that is not going to work out very well in the long term, and that a lot of that cost is going to be put onto regional and local governments, and
There,
who are are
There's a thing here that I think it ties in with an insight which I got from your book, and this is this anticipatory design, like this societal acupuncture, because you are inspired by Buckminster Fuller, by his comprehensive design science, and I wonder if you can tell us, now that you're talking exactly about this, what is the practical difference between a community doing this anticipatory design, let's say preparation for a crisis, right, for a next flood, or and one that's just doing good crisis response? Any
mm-hmm.
any insights there?
Well, hopefully the anticipatory design is going to be aligned with crisis response. Right? Most people, even many of my friends here, they've heard me talking about community currencies and blockchain currencies for years, but they only think about it in terms of wealth and adding to their bank account and things like that. And I'd always say, well, no, this is going to be how we're going to be exchanging value between each other in the future after we've just recovered from a major crisis, right? After we've just been hit by a major crisis, governments aren't able to help us anymore. They're basically going to have to say, okay, we can't just keep printing money forever because that's not going to work. And so that's the societal acupuncture I'm talking about. Really is the individual action of each of us talking with our friends and saying, hey, this issue is really starting to concern me. Maybe I'm falling down an algorithm rabbit hole, but it looks like we're seeing more and more real crises in the world, ecological crises, and that transcends the political differences between us, right? So, well, ideally it should, unless people say, no, we should let those people who are drowning drown, right? We should try and help them because that's how it works in the economy, right? Poor people can be homeless, right? And that's fine, fine for us. But it doesn't fit with me very, very well. And so I love E.F. Schumacher and Buckminster Fuller for providing really excellent tools for how to understand this situation, right? To simplify and not over complexify problems, right? To go to look for specific points of confluence that you can work with, that people can understand, that transcend the resistance they may have towards more social oriented behavior, right? Which seems to be the biggest problem that I encounter in talking with people, right? As people say, well, no, this is mine, and why should I be, giving up what I've worked so hard to earn to give to someone who obviously was not, doing the same for themselves, accumulating wealth and working a 9 to 9, 6 days a week kind of job in order to be able to do that, right? And so it's getting over those kinds of mental hurdles. And anticipatory design is like collaborative futurism, right? So it's exploring futurism together and not just saying, okay, well, I love who wrote the third wave and future shock, Alvin Toffler, right? Looking at futurists and saying, oh, megatrends, we have to look at the megatrends and we have to, the third wave of digital stuff, or his book Revolutionary Wealth, where he was one of the first people to talk about programmable money, right? Digital programmable money in the mid 2000s, 2004 or 5. He was already seeing that, but we need to transition from that kind of, let's look at what are the futurists saying, and saying, no, we should actually be doing that right here this Friday, over a few beers at the local pub, right? Or something like that. And saying, yes, absolutely. What is my town of Ubud in Bali going to look like in 20 years if we have massive development going on, and the roads haven't changed in 20 years because the national government has told the provincial government that they're now in charge of the roads, they're now in charge of the garbage management, they're now in charge of of social welfare, and we're just going to collect money and make the big decisions, right? Which is what's happening here in Indonesia. It's happening in many other countries as well too, where a lot of responsibility for these kinds of things is being put onto local governments, and local governments are saying, "Oh my God, we don't have anywhere near. I mean, we can't print our own money to repair the roads or to build better drainage systems or to, you know." And so they're trying to push it back up, and everyone's playing a kind of a game of hot potato in government. Well, in between that, as Michelle Bowen says, when states are failing and when markets are failing, it's up to the commons to come back in, and that's what happens, as Michelle describes beautifully through his writing, is that those failures by market and state create the space in which the commons can arise, and start
and
to fill
yeah,
in those spaces, and that's us, and that's blockchain based digital currencies, that's community
and
currencies, however
Stephen,
however it is, right?
in your book, you also, in the last chapter, you are framing governance as the nervous system of any regenerative economic initiative, but not the governance. Not you're not talking about government as the state, which is actually the
Mm-hmm.
opposite of that. So I'm just wondering, now that you're talking exactly about this. Well, again, I'm pushing you. If you can, or if you identified any patterns of governance that actually can grow trust and capacity over time, and it's also not burnings of volunteers who are actually there in the field and wanted to do something and help, as you say. Now, okay, we have to take care of garbage and everything, and
Mm-hmm.
do our road. And are there any, I mean, patterns or whatever, any ideas, how to cope with that? I mean, you said,
Mm-hmm.
Michelle, yes, but tell us your thoughts, because in the last chapter, I think you have a very good coverage of that.
Right. Well, I think people are often too scared of the government response or the regulatory response to what they want to build. And if, for examples, I would look at, say, the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain, which have incorporated the financial element into the cooperative enterprise network structures that they've created there. Or the Veer Bank in Switzerland, which started off as a cooperative institution with between small enterprises across Switzerland, and then they have their own community currency, but business to business enterprise based um, mutual credit system, which were able to be set up before the regulators could shut it down, right? Or they stay quiet enough. It's really hard to get people from Mondragon or from Veer to come out and talk with other groups and try to spread or replicate their model. So maybe they've been told by the regulators, okay, what you're doing is fine. We're not going to shut it down, but don't tell anyone else how to do it, right? Because those are really good models of governance, and that incorporates the financial wealth generating and distribution elements that are essential to preventing volunteer burnout, right? And as I was saying at the beginning of our talk today, that was that it was the payment of community currency to the people who were administrating the Victoria local exchange trading system that caused the system to capsize, because the growth of the economy wasn't keeping pace with the rate at which people were being paid, right? But of course, you can't always tell them, well, you're only going to get paid unless you bring in, build up a much bigger economy, which justifies, your payment, because that's going to be a distribution of, say, 2.5% or 5% of the overall, pool that the administration could claim through transaction fees or the fees that it charges, right? So what ideal governance would look like, but of course, there's concerns in there as well too, right? Or concerns or worries about how to balance those two, because governance needs to strengthen the economic system, and the economic system needs to strengthen the governments, and so there's a lot of you can't. And we deliberately don't prescribe particular models in the book. We talk about it in more general and more general terms, right? And it flows back and forth, between trying to say, well, there's some good ideas here, but then there's some good ideas over here as well too. And it's really up to the people who are starting these systems to um, try and do as much reading as they can about the history of governance, the long history that we've had, the ancient history of governance, the polis, and how ancient government systems functioned, and how they were able to create the economic systems that led to the flourishing, the previous renaissances of human society. Which is what I enjoyed so much about your talk with Joel Dietz that I watched just recently, and the talks that I have with Joel Dietz and with others on this same issue, right? Is that, but then people would say, oh, well, but the time frame is very short. As Jim Bundell says, we are going to see increasingly massively devastating crises, ecological crises or storms hitting us, very, very quickly. So, um, how do you scale organically when you're all of a sudden under the pressure of major crises hitting, right? And
That's exactly
it's a
my
tough.
question, because you mentioned, of course, that they want to keep these experiments small, don't propagate. And many such beautiful experiments, as you exemplified, yes, in Switzerland, in Spain, and there are, of course, many particular in many
Many
villages.
others.
And the
Hmm.
question is now, you also mentioned this federated polycentric models in the book. So can this system scale, speaking of scaling, while keeping
Hmm.
local autonomy and lived relationships at the center? I mean, how do you scale without
Yeah.
losing soul, if I may?
Right, right. Well, we have that issue with community currencies all the time as well too. When you move to high trust systems to low trust
Mm,
systems,
mm.
pe- people in mutual credit systems, they usually grow up to Dunbar's number of 150 participants, and then it's really hard to add more people. The cost of acquisition starts to skyrocket, and the potential for people who are not aligned with the philosophy of the system to come in and to break it down. And we saw that with the collapse of the Red Global de Troika in Argentina, which was 10 years ahead of its time in predicting the depeg of the Argentine peso to the US dollar, and had started markets. There were 20 markets using local currency only in Buenos Aires from, say, 1997 to 2002. And then when the depeg happened in 2003, there were millions of people that flooded into the system, and they didn't have the same philosophy that had been built up over years and years and years. And then it led to issues, the cost of printing the notes, because there was no support from the municipal government or any government to do that. Argentina has had a lot of issues with both good and bad parallel money printing over 100 years, and states doing it and communities doing it and businesses doing it, and just like in the U.S. At the end of the Depression or during the Depression era, there were many community currencies, and some were fantastic, and some were absolutely horrible, right? Horrible failures that were that really damaged people's trust in the use of money in a society, right? And they just said, no, I think we're just going to barter. Yeah, we're just going to barter between each other from now on, because it's when these other people start coming in. So that that's it's really a
Mm.
tough issue, right?
It is a tough issue, and I don't know. It's like because we live in a world that tells us that this is the right thing to do, to be greedy and competitive and all that. And it's not, it's exactly the opposite of the symbiotic way of living, which you and your communities are actually instantiating. So,
Right.
as a question for someone listening who feels this regenerative imperative, if I may, in their bones, in their blood, but don't
Hmm.
know where to start. what would be the first step they can take in their community, in their life, that would align with the journey
Hmm.
from your book?
Well, there's a lot of fantastic books, and I do a lot of reading, right? So I think it's going through,
So not
and
only to
finding
read
your
your
way.
book, to read more.
Oh yeah, not just your book and not just my book. I think Bitcoin from Burning Man and Beyond is also fantastic primer. I mean, there's tons of books to read, and then there's talking with our friends about this issue, personally, and to see if there's some alignment in how other people are seeing this situation. And I think it's also in trying your own little experiments, social experimentation. Some people put exchange boxes out front of their house, for example. I see this in Europe, and I think it's wonderful. Where instead of posting, on the Facebook free cycle group or something like that, that they actually put a box outside and say, "This is free. I don't need these things, and you can do this too." Or putting up a notice board. There are many bulletin boards in the community, and everyone just sticks all their advertisements onto it, but actually splitting that board into what people are offering and what people are requesting, and what people are requesting cannot be posted into the what people are offering section. Yeah. And so that and vice versa, so that you actually start to create the foundations for a local marketplace and local exchange between people. Um, those are the kinds of things that I do when I start working with, in the communities that I've worked with here in Southeast Asia, is that kind of thing. And then I do game shops and workshops about money. There are a number of really wonderful games that we play um, in a social setting of, say, 20 or 30 people, using a colored paper and or a deck of cards, and where we talk about how community currency and, well, we starting off with fiat money and with community currency and with barter, and, well, it progresses, and you see how behavior changes based on the type of money that's how money is issued into an economy, and what the outcomes are in that game, right? And fiat money is a game of competition and dominance and speed and efficiency. Hmm. And then there are other ways of issuing money that slow people down, focus more on person to person or social negotiation regarding value, and so on. And so there are games like that. Those resources are freely available online, or it's something that Scott and I are happy to come and facilitate for communities, or others. I mean, of course, there are many other people, our colleagues in the collaborative finance group, that do these kinds of things as well too.
Amazing, amazing. And because you mentioned the games, I think they are very good education means. Because as you mentioned, Haifa, Annalise Smithman, who wrote the Haifa Constitution, she actually wrote with us also the AGI Constitution, and she has a game as well called the Earthwise game, also about regeneration and moving from game A to game B to the better game, like very similar, not similar, but aligned with your work. I do not know anything
Yeah,
about the game which you
I
are
think that,
actually.
and actually, I think that's the fastest way to scale. Going back to what we were
Yes,
just talking about a few moments ago, I think if we
yes.
develop an app that starts off as a game, where people put their information, they can put their personal information in, but that's just to make it relevant to them as an individual, and people start trading with each other. I think that's a better way to scale, because you're then able to incorporate the elements of exchange between people who aren't already familiar with each other, right? So you're going to towards the lower end of trust on the spectrum, that people who don't know each other very well, rather than just playing the game between people who get it, right? who are very concerned about it, because that can tend to form a governance or a monetary issuance kind of clique, right? Well, this is us. We were doing this first. We're the OGs. We're the, and identifying as we're somehow more innovative, special, influential than other people, and everyone else should listen to us, which sounds really great for the ego, but it doesn't work very well when your outcome is to actually scale this to say the 80% of people in a community that really do get this, right? Because I think Pareto's law comes into this, and that there are 20% of people in a community that really shouldn't be in a community currency system, right? They're always going to be greedy and or always be influenced by that side, right? Of selfishness and greed and disruptive behavior within collective systems, right? And we see it. We even see it in the common space and collaborative finance space. We have some people, who have been horribly disruptive, right? And unfortunately, they have to be removed, and it's really sad. But they have part of themselves which gets it, and they have part of themselves which just can't be let go of, right? And there are wonderful workshops on this. Um, Peter Koenig does a really excellent money retreat where people explore their relationships to money and wealth, and I think that's those kinds of activities are good as well too. So not just talking about exchange, but taking a step right back and looking at your own relationship to receiving and giving and that kind of thing, to understand what's really going on inside of you more deeply. That's almost as important as doing a very deep risk assessment of yourself before becoming a crypto trader, right? Because you need to understand your tolerance towards risk if you're going to trade cryptocurrencies, and it's sort of it's a parallel with how we engage with wealth. If we feel like we're giving too much out and not receiving an equal amount back, how does that make us feel, and how are we going to respond to that? Or if it's those kinds of things. If we're losing wealth very quickly by trading crypto, how are we going to respond? Are we going to just dump it all and be really angry for the rest of the day, or actually are we going to take more measured responses to how we respond? And so, if we draw a parallel with governance, it needs to be the same, because sometimes it's people treat it as a winner take all kind of game, and we certainly see that in some leadership of governments and countries in the world today, that people play, those people are playing zero sum games, and they're not saying, well, I don't agree so much with those other people for these reasons, but I'm going to take a more measured response to that and see if I can get them to understand my way of viewing things, right? and instead, no, they're like, I've got the ban hammer and I'm gonna, blow them out of the water, right? And it's the same thing as people, dumping their holdings in crypto, or going all in long, or whatever, however you want to draw that parallel, right?
But those are the old games, I would say. The game A, not the game B, the regenerative, which we are talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's the
those are
long
kind
game,
of,
right?
yeah, it's the Wall
Yeah.
Street game now played by the so-called, who were supposed to be the cypherpunks, but now they became the Ponzinomics. So that's what we're talking about here. But my point is,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned know thyself, of course, and that's written on the oracle that gated the oracle at Delphi. And of course, again, it brings us back to the forever project, yes, in which we are
Mm-hmm.
esteemed human. So we have to kind of reawaken that. And where we got from there, yeah, from when the project started, and we got to this greediness in our world. And like Woody Allen, I listened to one of his podcasts now, and he was mentioning, like, we are a failed species. So when you're telling me about that, even in this community currencies, you find those disruptive individuals. It's just very painful, and kind of makes me lose my hope, because you mentioned Joel, and Joel is such a wonderful person, and modest, and like he's a genius, definitely in my opinion, and a true cypherpunk, right? A pioneer in crypto, from this cypherpunk's perspective, Ethereum pioneer, MetaMask pioneer, and all that, and then
Swarm
everything was
Fund,
taken
yeah.
over. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I
and
mean,
he,
I first got to know Joel. I mean, with through community currency stuff, because he's also been very interested in that area and collaborative
of
finance,
course, he
but
he
also
designed
through
the
the
currency for Mars. I do not know if you
yeah,
know, but
yeah.
so, yeah, yeah.
And what they were building was Swarm Fund, which was also a really fantastic
Yes,
early introduction to being able to invest, aggregate wealth, and distribute it to worthy projects, on the blockchain. So he's been way out in front, time
that
and again.
and that's how I met him. I met him when we launched the book. This book I mentioned in Stanford,
Hmm.
and he was teaching in. I don't remember in which department, but he was lecturing there about this kind of distributed systems and currencies. But Stephen, I wanted to ask you, what drove you to write the book? Why did you write this book?
Um, I think because Scott and I have known each other for many many years, and we've both worked with directly with communities. Him in New York. He took over, basically. I mean, revitalized Ithaca Hours and started to turn it into, Ithaca Hours is one of the very first hours type or time exchange or time banking systems in the U.S. and and also working with many other communities as well, and was also going more digital. And I was sort of in the same in my work, both in third world and first world countries. And so we've been having, and we're also one of the very early people in the community currency space who were talking about digital currencies. So when we were in Barcelona in 2017, we both gave talks on this topic when most people in community currencies had no idea about it. They were very scared of technology, financial technologies, wanted to keep it to the very much to the human element and not just abstracted into, they're scared of abstractions. They feel that that's a slippery slope right into recreating extractive economic or yang monetary systems. And they didn't want to do that. But Scott and I were both saying, wait, no, actually, there's some really good things, really good potential in this space if we can tip it together and influence how it develops. So we've been in communication, and with a number of others as well too. Edgar Campers, who and Rob Van Hilton, who are the heads of Coin, and Edgar Campers now leads Haifa.energy, which is an energy power DAO cooperative, and Rob Van Hilton is at a senior level in the Amsterdam Circular Economy project, which is also a very fantastic program. And so I mean with them, I mean, and many others. I could spend another 20 minutes listing off names and all of the awesome things that they're doing. Yes. um, was the opportunity that Kevin gave us. So when we were in Bangkok last year, Scott and I sat down with Kevin and we took this to him. And Kevin was, the Allo Capital is a really fantastic company, and they've supported the publishing of a number of really great books on Ethereum localism and exploring MycoFi, which is looking at how value flows happen within mycelial networks and how that can be used as a model for economic systems. Um, and so under exploring MycoFi and Ethereum localism are really great books. There are a number of others in their list as well too. Of course, the book that Kevin did on on-chain capital allocation, right? So as a fundamental treatise on how we can use the blockchain to exchange many different forms of capital or money or wealth between us. And so he heard us talking about this, and he said, "Great, because we're really missing that first piece on how ancient forms of social and economic organization brought us to this day and what we're trying to achieve with blockchain technologies." And so, great, you guys write it. That'll basically become the primer for introducing people into all of the other elements. And if they read all of these things, then they will become experts in really how to design applications for blockchain. Right? Yeah, but that's not how it's happening in the real world. So if we look at funding the commons, as you were pointing out earlier, their speaking structure is the sage on the stage. They get the wonderful, multimillionaire, huge blockchain project people to come up and talk about these things. And so I was very fortunate that my talk was scheduled for the last session of the morning, and it was a blessing in disguise that I wasn't able to. There was no time left for me to get up on the stage because that's not really how I like to operate. I don't want to. I don't like the cult of personality in the blockchain space at all. Yes, yes. So I wanted to speak with, and that's how I did it together with Scott. So I just turned to Scott because he was right beside me, and I said, "All right, buddy, let's do this. This is way better." And so we had everyone bring their lunches, and we sat down together, and we listened and learned and talked and shared and had lunch together, which is normally how we operate in the collaborative finance gathering, which I organize at the Commons Hub in Austria. So there are people who can give presentations on what they're building, but that's very limited in scope. And then we go to open space where everyone can um, propose sessions collectively on what they want to speak about. And then we have the rest of the evening together over a 6-7 day period of getting to know each other more deeply, where we explore our relationships with money. We explore the challenges in our lives that brought us into this space, whether coming from the working class or having their family lose everything in the 2008 crisis, which is also another big motivator for people to move into this space, or an ecological disaster that wiped out their communities, and they found themselves in this wonderfully free, I mean, horribly wonderfully free space of developing crisis responses. Yes, the California fires, the tsunami in Southeast Asia, and so on, went disasters that create situations in which people become extremely resilient and creative, and they don't lose those experiences, and they saw the beauty of human society for that little moment until the government and the aid agencies and so on and the military came back in to restore order, right? And to maintain the existing systems that keep them in power.
Mm, mm.
But
So,
those experiences never change, right? People never lose those
so
things.
exactly, and this is what I want to ask you now in the end of our conversation, because we've been here for 1.5 hours already. But Stephen, imagine that we are talking again in the very far future when your dream of regeneration was
Hmm.
accomplished. How does the world look then?
Hmm. Well, it's going to look a lot more like we could actually use this currency system in Star Trek or on Mars. Yeah. Uh, so in my view, national governments will have failed, right? And so national governments will fade away. And this was also Bernard Lietaer's long-term future vision as well, in many ways, that national currencies would fail, governments would fail under the crushing weight of the debt that they created, unrepayable debt, right? And so there would need to be a system reset, but they're not going to be able to reset that system through UN-style negotiations. It will be knocked out as the result of a crisis in which provincial or regional and local governments need to step in. But the current structure of how those governments operate, because they are part of the existing national currency system, they rely on tax money. The taxes, our taxes go to the national government. The national government gives some of it to regional and local governments. That's not going to work out, and so we, as business owners, I'm a business owner, and as individuals, are going to start generating our own forms of money from the bottom up and our own forms of governance. Because if we're the ones generating the money in the economy, and we're generating the goods and services that circulate, then we should have control over how that works within a commons-based economic system. And so that would be the future that I see, is that we can certainly engage with people who are in government now, because there are good people, or people with good intentions that are currently in the government that are facing a very serious uphill battle, and they could come back, and we'll welcome them with open arms into helping to structure more local and regional governance. And then we will have a Cosmo level on top of that local that can allow for people to move between spaces. We won't have national governments blocking their borders from people leaving. People used to be able to travel very freely, and as we see now, it's really hard to send money internationally, officially. It's really hard to travel. You've got to make sure all your visas and your passports and all of these things are in place. Whereas in the past, people always had that freedom of movement. If you were living in a government you didn't agree with, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, you can walk, right? You're not stuck, in that space. And so we will see much greater freedom of movement between spaces, if that's what we want to do. And I think that we'll have airships, and we'll be able to travel a lot more freely, without
Well,
having to
I
fly
think
in
you
jet
nailed it.
airplanes.
When you said Star Trek, it's kind of clear. So
Yeah.
ladies and gentlemen, get the
Hmm.
book. It's the primer. Kevin Owoki said it's the primer, and they wrote it as the primer. After this, you can read all the other books. So we will post the link to the book in the description, and I will ask you, I will send you an email, because I took so many notes with all these projects, and which you mentioned here, yes, in Spain, Switzerland, and so on. So we put the links, and of course links to your past projects and so on and so forth. Stephen, really, it was such an amazing conversation, and taking us. So my takeaway is definitely, as just my aha moment in this conversation is that, oh, wait a second, this is an old project. There's nothing new here. We are just remembering. Come on, people, Team Human, come back to your senses. What are you doing? You departed too far from from the original project. Let's come back to it and do it right. So thank you so much, Stephen. This is definitely an eye opener for us, and especially now in the era of the Ponzinomics time. It's time to wake up and actually implement the good games. Like you mentioned, there are still the people like you, Kevin, Joel, who still, and of course we here as well, who still
Yes.
believe in the honest game, and
Hmm.
yeah, we can use
And you
technology
and
to
Margaret
enable
Kennedy
it.
and, yeah, Kate Raworth and, you know,
Exactly. All
yeah,
of them, and
yeah.
you will send
So
me
many
their
great
books
men
as
and women
well.
who are working in this space. Yeah.
Totally. So we are not alone. We can do it. Thank you again so much. And of course, we will also post how they can contact you and Scott for engagements in consulting and so on and so forth to work with their communities.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Mihaela. And yes, that would be our outcome, is to assist communities and municipal and regional governments to implement these systems and find the right people to be assisting them, as consultants. Thank you very
Totally.
much.
Thank you. Because you also mentioned, yes, you have colleagues and so on, so you don't want to take all the business for yourself. I really appreciated that when you
Absolutely.
mentioned it. Yes, I was like, yeah, we
Absolutely.
share. Yes, it's lovely, and that's the thing, right? I mean, also how you and Joel, because we have both of you now on the podcast, how you speak versus the charismatic and the marketing optics people who are usually going on stages, and unfortunately they mislead us so much, and then we get victims to those kind of characters. So I think it's very
Yeah.
good takeaway. Know thyself. Look deep into yourself and
Absolutely.
find the essence, that soul. Don't forget
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Thank you, and you are such a model and an example, Stephen. Thank you so
Thank you
much
very
again.
much.